That's it. So we finished hauling our moose back home, and I've got it here in my little cutting shack, and we just took one of the hindquarters, and we took it directly from our side by side, and put it on my cutting table here, and we're going to go through the whole process of cutting this hindquarter into chunks, how we traditionally do it. Now I know in a butcher shop they do it way different than we do it traditionally, but we do it the traditional way because when we're cutting meat, we're keeping in mind that we're trying to cut this meat for more than likely to make dry meat or into steaks and stew meat and stuff like that. We're not going for the fancy steaks or anything like that. We're just trying to get it processed in the way that we were taught growing up. And that's the way we're going to do it today. So the first thing I'm going to do is I need to remove this bottom half of the leg. So I'm going to start by skinning past this joint, just so I can expose that joint, because I'm going to be cutting that leg, what's remaining there, right at the joint. And I don't even have to go right around. I'll just go up to here. And the tendon here, I'm going to cut that first, because that's where the leg, the lower part of the leg is going to come apart. Then I'm just going to sort of feel around here, and you could feel where the joint line is, and I'm just going to cut it there. And use the tip of my knife just to feel through those tendons and joints in there, just to cut this lower part of the leg off. And it does take a little bit of practice and a little bit of work to get to know where those legs join, and you probably want to even move it so that you can feel where the bone turns. There's really no perfect way to do it. Each time it seems a little different when you're taking these joints apart. But I can see here, I've turned it all the way, and I could see where those ligaments hold that leg on there. See where my knife goes inside. And I'm just cutting through the ligaments and the connecting tissue to that joint there. Now with a lot of people, what they'll do is they'll just use a saw or something to break through that. But again, we're trying to save as much of the meat as we possibly can. And a part of that is taking these joints apart in this way. So again, I've got it mostly disconnected there, and I could see where it's going to separate. And I'm just using the tip of my knife to feel in there, cutting anything that's joining that leg, or the bottom half of the leg, onto there. And just going to move it forward and cut along the bottom side just to expose those ligaments and cut through them. And you might even want to give it a twist and just to get those remaining ligaments in there. Again, a saw would be much quicker, but I'm going to do this the way my Muslim kukum taught me when they didn't have a saw. I'm just going to twist it here a little. Hang it over the edge here to expose the rest of that inside of that joint. Because this is connected by muscles and ligaments and everything holding that leg on there. Because remember, when we're cutting something like this, there's no race, we're not on a time limit or anything. We just take our time, get it done right. Oh, I broke my blade in there. I'm just going to switch knives to my bigger knife. And you're just feeling through those bones to get that all the ligaments and everything cut through. And I'm just going to give it a twist here. And I could see where it's just hanging on a little bit by some ligaments. Get through that final ligament to remove the lower half of the foot. So with these, now there's really isn't anything for us to use on it, although some people would open it up and get the bone marrow out of here, out of this bone. However, it's a very narrow bone, so you don't get a whole lot of marrow. And some people, traditionally in fact, would even eat the hooves from here. They said it tastes really good, although it does take a lot of work to prepare the hooves when you're eating the hooves. You skin it right out, and you leave the hoof part on there, and then it's either roasted or boiled for a really long time, and you scrape off all the hair, and then you eat the hooves in there. However, like I said, it takes a really long time, lots of work, and for us, we're mainly interested in preparing the meat. So with these, most of the time what we do is we actually take these out into the bush, and we were taught this lower half of the leg. Another part of honoring the moose and the gift from Mooswa is to take this lower half of the leg, and we go lay them, all four of them, in the bush together, and we face them towards the east. And that's the way we're taught to do them. If you're not going to eat them, you take them out, take them into the bush somewhere, face the hooves facing the east in honor of the Mooswa. So with this one, that's probably what I'm going to do, is to go face those into the bush. So the next thing that I have to do is before I start cutting into the meat, I have to try and clean it off as much as I can, and try and get rid of as much of the hair and anything that's left on there. Even though after we've got it all cut up, we still clean it and we wash it and make sure all the hair and everything is gone. We still, as we're preparing it, so the first thing I'm going to do is all of this loose skin that is left on there, I'm just going to take that and skin that aside. A lot of this, you call it silver skin on the outside. I'm just going to shave that off, just so we expose the clean meat on the inside. And again, I just want to take off just that outer layer of skin that was kind of sticking on the hide. And I don't have to worry right now about completely cleaning it, because like I said, once we got it all cut up, we clean it again later. So I'm just carefully taking off that outer layer of skin, just to expose that nice clean meat on the inside. Any scraps like this, the muscle and everything, I'll throw aside, and we use it either for trapping bait or for to feed the birds and everything, because they've got to eat as well. So I've done this side, and we could see all of the muscles and everything are exposed. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn it over, because that's where I'm going to start kind of get into the chunks. So I'm just going to quickly turn it over here. So again, here you could see where we've got a lot of hair and grass and what have you from the bush. I'm just going to scrape that off as much as I can. And then again, I'm going to take that, as much of that skin off as I can, just to expose that inner clean meat there. So any skin like this where I can grab it, just gonna pull that up and expose that the clean meat there. Careful not to be cutting into the chunkier parts of the meat or the meat itself. Just that outer layer of skin where I can. And anywhere that I can't, all I gotta do is give it a quick scrape. And then again later, we're going to be washing this meat anyway before we process it any further than after we've cut it into chunks. So I just scrape it off wherever I can. Try and get it as clean as I can, but I don't have to worry about getting it completely clean, because again, you wash it before you process it further after this step. So again, anywhere I can see where that skin is hanging on, I'll just try and lift that and cut away that skin to expose that clean meat on the inside. Scraping off the hair where I can. Far back as I can, and again, like I said, we'll wash this later before we process it any further. Alright, so I've gotten most of it clean. Now we'll move on to the next step. Alright, so we've cleaned it off as much as I can for now. And like I said, we're gonna wash it all up later after we got it all put into chunks and all cut out of here. But I wanted to show you how we cut it, because we don't just randomly cut on this moose leg. It's actually the way I was taught from my mom, my dad, my koko, my musum, is there's certain ways you cut it, especially if you were usually cutting it for dry meat, or making it easier, breaking it down into workable chunks that we could use if we're going to make steaks or dry meat or anything like that. So with any animal, you'll see we've got lines here, and these are where the muscles are connected and separated. All we do is we follow those lines and we cut the moose into chunks. So you'll see this line here. I'm just going to follow this line, make a little cut with my knife, and then I'm going to see where that muscle joins and kind of separates in there. And I'm just going to follow that muscle now here. I can see it connects there. I'm just going to cut where it connects. And you'll see where I'm following just where those muscle groups are connected. And I'm just following, you can see the line here. I'm just going to follow that right to the kind of the tip there. And I'm going to just be cutting and separating those muscle groups from each other. Now when I'm first cutting this muswa, I'm just roughly cutting it, and later I'll cut it a little bit more cleanly and separate the bigger muscle groups. For now I'm just following the line of that first muscle group. And this first piece, this big piece on the outside, is pretty sure they call it the tri-tip. And part of the outside rounds on if we were doing a beef. But I'm just following those lines of where those muscle groups connect together. And you'll see this first chunk that I'm taking out here. That's the outside, and they usually call this a tri-tip because it's got the three corners on it. So that's the tri-tip. I'm going to set that aside because we're going to wash that and prepare it. Outside around, this chunk here, I'm going to separate that now. Again, following those lines, those connecting tissues, and separating. The meat tells me where I should be cutting and following those lines. So this is the outside round. And I'm just following those muscle lines and separating it. Again, outside round. Put that aside. This here, a lot of people get put off by it and think, oh, what is that? This is actually just a gland on a moose. Throughout our body we've got glands. They regulate our hormones and regulate our body. But that's just a gland, so we just cut those out because we want just the meat showing there. So we cut the glands and the connecting blood vessels and things like that. We just cut those out. Toss those aside. Again here, this is just a blood vessel. So we just cut that out. And remember, you just carefully cut when you're cutting. There's no race. You're not competing against anybody. So we just take our time. So now that I've got this exposed, what I'm going to do is I'm going to feel where the bone is on this joint. That was where the hind quarter was connected, where we saw that ball joint when we were skinning it. And I'm going to cut right against the bone there to disconnect those connecting bones. And I'm going to feel for the thinnest part of the meat along that bone. And that's where I'm going to cut. So I feel it's right in here. That's where it's at its thinnest. And I'm going to cut right to the bone, following the bone right to the kneecap over here. And I'm going to cut around that kneecap joint and free up those muscles and connecting tissues. So here I'm going to be cutting right against the bone as close as I can to free this inside round, they call it, from the rest of the leg. This part here came from sort of the hips and the butt. Really soft meat. But any chunks like this, we normally cut them off and use them either for to grind up into burger, or to make into stew meat, especially on the meat on along the hips and the butt, because that as well as soft meat. So I'm going to continue where I was with the larger bone of that was connected to the moose, and I'm going to keep cutting along that bone, keeping my knife right against the bone, just cutting the meat away. And again, butchers do it very differently, but this is the way we do it traditionally. I'm just going to turn this up now and continue cutting this away freely. And here we could see where the muscle and the connecting tissue are connected. I'm just going to follow those lines. So when we're cutting it into chunks, we're basically just following the natural lines of the meat. We're not just randomly cutting. We're following those muscle lines and those connecting tissue lines. That I'll put over here for now, and I'll show you what we do with that. So now this is all of the meat that was on that hind quarter. So from here, again, rather than keeping it into a big chunk like this, I'm going to free it up by, again, following the lines of the connecting tissue. So you can see, I can see where it was connected there. I'm just going to follow following the lines. When my kukum taught me, and my mom, that's what they said. Just follow the lines is what they told me. I was really afraid to do any cutting, and I didn't want to ruin the meat or anything. They said, don't, just follow the lines. The moose will tell you where you should be cutting. So I just follow the lines of those connecting tissues. Again, here I could see there's another line here that I could be following and splitting along. And I just follow those connecting lines, and it's telling me where I should be cutting. It's showing me sort of a road map that separates the meat in there. So again, they're like chunks like this. Traditionally, we would put them into chunks like this because this is perfect for making pansawan, or making into dry meat. And we'll be showing you that a bit later why we put it into these chunks, because how we cut it now is going to help us when we're further processing into dry meat and stuff like that. So I take that, and again, just following the lines. Anywhere I see a connecting tissue line, and again where I see any of these blood vessels and stuff, I just cut them off. And again, just following the connecting tissue lines. Follow the lines. It gives you a road map of where your cut should be. And again there, nice. All of the lines have been cut along it. This large outside round as well. Again, just going to follow the lines and disconnect any of the separated muscle groups from the rest. This one is a bit difficult because you can barely see the line, and you see here you can barely see the line. So I'm just going to cut, and then I expose where the silver skin is here, and I'm just going to follow that, carefully follow that silver skin. And it's almost like when I was skinning the moose. I'm going to follow that silver skin until I can separate that muscle group from the rest of the larger chunk. And again, I'm just following the lines. There's no absolute special way to do it traditionally. Like I said, I was taught just follow the lines. So now I've got this separated. This part here, because there's so many different muscle groups together, I leave it as one chunk. I'm not gonna cut it any further, just because it's so separated and not following any large lines. But this part will be used again for grind or for stew meat. So I put that aside. Now this is a very large piece here. So of course I don't want to leave that like that because it's a little too large. And if I leave it like that, it's going to take a while to cool off, because ultimately I want this meat to cool off and firm up a bit. So again, here I'm just cutting off the blood vessels and connecting tissues. This I'd split right down the middle, so I have two large chunks right down the center. So I've got the two larger chunks again for when I process it further. So you see where all the muscle groups are just separated. Now with this, what I'm going to do is, this is another good chunk of meat here. So I'm just going to, again, following the muscle line, separate it from the bone on this side. I'm going to leave that tendon on for now, and just following, again, it's just following the road map. Here I'm going right against the muscle, right against the bone. Turn it over to separate that. And although this is a lot of muscle, still a really good piece of meat. Even from here I could still clean it more if I wanted to, just by taking off that outer skin. The gristle and silver skin, the skin that was holding on to the hide. Now with this one, I'm just going to put this aside for now, because I want to show you this one. Because in here you could see there's lines here where I could cut this inner muscle out. Because traditionally what we do, we cut these muscles out, following the lines of the muscle. And actually this piece, as well as pieces from the front quarter, which is mainly muscle, what we do with those is we actually smoke those. Because I know with my kokum, my Muslim, my mom, my dad, they'd always call these the moose bolognas. But what we do with them is they cut them down the middle. And you could see all of the muscle in there. Mainly muscle. So I know a lot of people just throw these away, but this is actually a really tasty piece of meat as well. Because if I smoke this over my smoker for a full day, and then I put it in a roaster for maybe 4 hours, slow cooking, 4 or 6 hours in a roaster, slow cooking. This goes really soft and super tasty. But that's what we do with mussels. Normally mussels that are either thrown away or not used. Now the rest of this mussel and where the tendon was, I'm just going to cut that off, because that's all just tendon and muscle. This, I can use this piece again if I want to cut it into strips and make more of these for smoking, or because you can see the thicker meat in there, we'd make it into like jerky strips or just strips of smoking meat, and again smoke it like we would these and use it for smoking. Because with this, super hard to clean because of the mussels, super hard to grind because of the mussels, and if you did grind it, you're gonna get more muscle than anything in there, and it's just gonna be a really chewy burger. So what we do with them is we smoke them like that, and we use them for roasts, even like this, a roast by itself for a family, slow cooking it 4 to 6 hours, goes super soft, the muscles break apart, and the meat is excellent. So that goes aside for either cutting into strips like this for smoking, or just for using as a roast like that. Now we're still not done with this leg, because like I said, traditionally we use absolutely everything we possibly can. So I'm going to clean this off, exposing all of this. I'm going to take this kneecap off of here. You can feel it, it's just the bone. I'm going to disconnect that and continue cleaning the rest of this leg. So I've got the whole joint off of there. You could see the sort of the kneecap right there. Cut that off. Take off as much of the skin, so again, that's just the bone. Now this, I'm going to take this bone off, because this bone is very important to us as Nihiawak. Because this bone houses the thickest section of marrow in the bones is in here, and we just love that bone marrow. Now I know when I was growing up, these were a delicacy, because what we do as kids, we'd get these, and my mom and dad would give them to us, and we'd wrap them in tin foil and throw them on the fire, or roast the whole bone like this. After it was roasted for about an hour, we would eat the meat, whatever we can, off the outside. Then we'd take a hammer and we'd bust this bone open in the middle to get at the marrow, because the marrow is super healthy and super tasty. In fact, growing up, I was always told, eat as much bone marrow from an ungulate, like a moose, elk, or deer. Mostly the moose, because we're told actually that it'll actually provide protective powers to your immune system, and it'll keep stuff like cancer and bad sicknesses away. So we're told always make sure you're eating the moose bone marrow. Elk bone marrow is a little different, I've noticed. I've tried it before, and it's nowhere near how the moose is. With the moose, it's kind of thick, like when it's when it's not fresh. When it's fresh, it's kind of slimy, but when you leave it, say for a day or something to finish cooling, it goes kind of like a wax or something, but it's kind of thick and you can easily collect it. But we were told make sure you eat bone marrow. Now with this, bothers me really lots because I see so many people take this part of a moose and just throw it away. Because again, it's mostly muscle. These are all muscles. Again, we would cut these muscles off normally, and we would make these out of these, all of these muscles, because you get about 6 or 7 different separations in the muscles here. Because it's a leg and it does a lot of work, but you get these different muscles out of there. But we would always cut them like this, smoke them, and keep them for those, what my mom and dad called moose bolognas. Once they were smoked, and they were super yummy. What we're going to do with this though is we're going to leave it like this. We're going to let it sit and firm up, because once it sits and the meat firms up, so it's not jiggly like this, we're going to actually cut this into shank steaks. So anyone who knows anything about butchering knows that this is the shank. So when you're making a shank roast, it actually comes from this bone, and they just cut through the bone into roast sizes, and you get not only the meat from this muscle, but the bone marrow from inside in your shank roast. So this is, we're going to keep this shank, let it firm up, and then we're going to cut it on our bandsaw into shank roasts. So out of that whole hind quarter, again, you saw how little we left in the bush. We harvested everything we can. All we've got that's not going to be eaten is this lower part of the foot. And even that, like I said, if an elder asked me to keep the hooves, that they're going to process it and eat it, I would keep it and process it. And what I'll probably do is I'll keep probably 2 of them, just so I can show you guys how we prepare those moose hooves. But for now, once we're done that, from this hind quarter, it's pretty well only going to be this long narrow bone that's left, and nothing else. The hair and this long narrow bone. Because like I said, very little bone marrow in this bone, because it's just a narrow little, and it's hard to get that marrow out of this narrow bone here. So that is how we process a hind quarter. So we're going to take a little break, and then we're going to show you how we process a front quarter.